The medical scanner was only supposed to synthesize a basic blood substitute. It was a routine procedure on thousands of coalition vessels. But the moment the laser passed over the human's arm and read his raw genetic sequence, the console didn't just flash an error. It began to violently overheat. Then the shrill, ear-piercing shriek of a Class 1 extinction alarm echoed through the sterile medical bay. Red emergency lights bathed the pristine white walls in a terrifying glow. The chief medical officer stared at the holographic readout, his face draining of color, as he whispered into his comms. "Lock down the wing. Evacuate everyone. Now, the cold of deep space is not a sudden shock. It is a slow, creeping thief." Davies Miller felt it stealing the feeling from his extremities, first working its way up through the insulated layers of his vacuum suit. He was 22 days out from the lunar colony, contracted by Aegis Aerospace, to haul a payload of processed helium-3 to the outer asteroid belt. It was supposed to be a routine haul, a boring milk run that paid just enough to cover his daughter's tuition. Then the ship's primary reactor had inexplicably ruptured. There was no fire, just a silent, violent decompression that ripped the Aegis freighter apart like a tin can caught in a hydraulic press. Davies had barely made it into the emergency pod, a commercial model manufactured by Boeing, before the shockwave threw him into the void. His communications array was fried. His distress beacon was a faint, pathetic pulse against the deafening static of background cosmic radiation. For 3 days he drifted. He rationing his water, staring out the reinforced quartz window at the indifferent stars, waiting for the oxygen scrubbers to finally give out. When the massive shadow-like silhouette of the alien vessel blotted out the sun, Davies didn't feel relief. He felt the terrifying certainty that his mind was finally fracturing. The ship was impossible. It looked less like a machine and more like a sleek obsidian leviathan moving with a silent grace that defied the laws of physics he had been taught at the Lockheed Martin Flight Academy in Denver. A tractor beam, cold and blue, enveloped his pod, dragging him into the belly of the beast. When the pod doors were finally pried open, Davies was barely conscious. His vision swam with gray spots. He remembered a rush of sterile, overly oxygenated air and the blurred shapes of tall, impossibly slender figures moving around him. They didn't look like the little green men from the movies. They were pale, almost translucent, clad in pristine silver uniforms. Before he passed out, one of them pressed a small, cold metallic disc against his temple. A sharp pinch, a rush of static in his brain, and suddenly the ambient clicks and hums of their language translated into crisp, flawless English inside his mind. "His vitals are crashing," a voice echoed, female calm but urgent. The universal translator, adapting to his human cognitive frameworks, assigned her a familiar linguistic tag. He heard her name as Charlotte. "Get him to the medical bay," a deeper, authoritative voice commanded. Commander Reed. "We don't know what kind of atmospheric contaminants his species carries. Initiate Level 2 quarantine protocols." Davies tried to speak, to tell them his name, to tell them he was bleeding from a nasty piece of shrapnel that had caught his thigh during the explosion, but his throat was like sandpaper. The darkness rushed back in, pulling him under. He awoke to the rhythmic humming of machinery and the sharp, sterile scent of ozone and antiseptic. He was lying on a sleek, contoured table that felt like it was made of solidified light. Above him, a massive array of crystalline lenses and glowing sensors shifted and whirred. Standing beside the bed was a tall, severe-looking alien. His uniform denoted rank, and the translator smoothly identified him as Dr. Victor. Victor's face was angular, his eyes a pale, luminous blue that blinked infrequently. "You are awake," Victor said, his tone clinical, lacking any inflection of surprise. "You are aboard the coalition vessel, the Horizon. You were found adrift. Your vessel was destroyed." Davies swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Davies. My name is Davies Miller. Davies," Victor repeated, tasting the syllables as if they were a foreign chemical compound. "You have suffered severe lacerations and severe blood loss. Your cellular structure is unique to our databanks. You are from an uncharted sector." "Earth," Davies croaked. "The Sol system." "We have no record of Earth," Victor replied smoothly. "We need to replace your lost fluids, but without a biological baseline, introducing our standard synthetic plasma could trigger a fatal immunological response. We must sequence your DNA to synthesize a compatible blood substitute." Davies nodded weakly. "Do what you gotta do, Doc. I'm not ready to die yet." Victor turned to the console. "This is a standard procedure. The sequencer will read a single cellular sample map, your genome, and instruct the fabricators. It will take only a moment." Davies lay back, watching the array above him shift. He felt a strange sense of calm. He had been rescued. He was in an advanced medical facility. He was going to live. He had no idea that in less than 5 minutes he would become the most terrifying entity on the ship. The medical bay of the Horizon was a marvel of galactic engineering. The coalition of aligned species had spent 10,000 years eradicating disease, extending lifespans, and perfecting the art of biological stabilization. Most species in the galaxy had evolved on tranquil, unified worlds. Their biology was elegant, efficient, and fragile. They had engineered the violence out of their own bodies millennia ago. Their DNA was neat, mathematically beautiful, and completely devoid of chaos. Dr. Victor tapped the glowing interface on his console. Nurse Charlotte extracted a microsample from the subject's dermal layer. Charlotte approached with a sleek pen-like instrument. She pressed it gently against Davies's uninjured arm. There was no needle, just a brief flash of heat. "Sample acquired, doctor," feeding it into the primary sequencer. "Excellent," Victor said. He looked at Davies. "The machine will now read your genetic blueprint. Do not be alarmed by the lights." A holographic display materialized in the center of the room, designed to project the elegant double helix structures common to all known sentient life. Usually the projection was a serene blue, a simple spinning lattice of genetic logic. The machine ingested the microscopic drop of Davies's blood. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the machine let out a low, grinding hum that vibrated through the floorboards. The pitch escalated rapidly, like a turbine engine straining against a heavy load. Victor frowned. He tapped the console. "Charlotte, check the calibration. The sequencer is drawing excess power." "Calibration is nominal, doctor," Charlotte replied, her voice tinged with a sudden, uncharacteristic waver. It's the sample. The processing core is struggling to map the sequence." "Impossible," Victor scoffed, stepping closer to the display. "It's a carbon-based biped. The complexity cannot exceed standard parameters." The holographic projector flickered, sputtered, and suddenly burst into a blinding, chaotic tangle of crimson light. Davies squinted, shielding his eyes. Instead of an elegant spinning ladder, the hologram projected a massive, sprawling, nightmarish jungle of genetic code. It was thick, redundant, and violently complex. There were dead ends, overlapping strands, shattered fragments of ancient genetic material and structures that looked less like building blocks and more like armor plating. "What is this?" Victor whispered, his pale blue eyes widening in horror. His fingers flew across the console, trying to isolate a single, readable sequence. "Doctor," Charlotte backed away from the machine. "Look at the microbial analysis. This organism, it is not sterile." "Everyone has gut bacteria," Davies offered weakly from the bed, feeling suddenly defensive about his hygiene. Victor ignored him, his eyes glued to the scrolling data. "It is not just bacteria. His DNA, it is a graveyard and a war zone. In the sterile logical universe of the Coalition, biology was clean. But human DNA is not clean. It is a brutal 3-billion-year-old record of a species that survived Ice Age's supervolcanoes and countless plagues. Roughly 8% of human DNA is made up of endogenous retroviruses. Ancient viruses that infected humanity's ancestors were defeated and were then violently assimilated into the genetic code itself. To the medical scanner of the horizon, this wasn't a biological blueprint. It was a terrifying manifesto of conquest. The sequence contains thousands of deactivated viral codes. Victor stammered, the sterile calm of his demeanor shattering. It's as if his species consumes biological weapons and weaves them into their own architecture. And the defensive mechanisms. The sequencer isolated a single human white blood cell, a macrophage. On the holographic display, it appeared as a massive amorphous monster. The alien database analyzed its behavior. It hunted, it engulfed it, dissolved its enemies in acid, and it kept a chemical memory of the kill. "This is not a cellular structure," Charlotte gasped, her hands shaking. "It is an autonomous microscopic predator, millions of them, swimming in his veins." The machine hummed louder, the sound turning into a physical vibration that rattled the medical tools on their trays. The sequencer's AI, a highly advanced system designed to identify and eliminate biological threats, was having a nervous breakdown. It was trying to categorize Davies. Is it a sentient being? Yes. Is it a host for a Class 5 plague? Yes. Is it an apex predator at the cellular level? Yes. Does it carry enough dormant genetic weaponry to sterilize a biosphere? Yes. The console began to flash yellow, then a deep, angry orange. Warning chimes began to echo through the bay. "Doctor, the core temperature of the sequencer is exceeding safe limits," Charlotte yelled over the noise. "It's trying to process the junk DNA, but there are millions of lines of seemingly dormant code. It's caught in a recursive loop." Davies tried to sit up, his heart pounding. "Hey, what's going on? Is the machine broken?" Victor turned slowly to look at Davies. He didn't see a wounded traveler anymore. He saw a walking extinction event. "You, what kind of death world produced you?" Before Davies could answer, the sequencer's internal safeties failed. A shower of sparks erupted from the primary console. The holographic projector turned a violent blood red, and the screen flashed a single terrifying designation in the Universal Coalition language, translated instantly into Davies's mind. Threat level Omega, biosphere, contaminant, containment, failure imminent. Then the primary alarms triggered. The sound was like nothing Davies had ever heard. It wasn't a ringing bell or a wailing siren. It was a guttural, synthesized shriek that seemed to bypass his ears and vibrate directly in his teeth. It was a sound designed to elicit pure, instinctual panic in any species. Instantly, thick slabs of metallic composite slammed down over the medical bay doors, sealing them shut with a heavy magnetic thud. The pristine white lighting snapped off, replaced by a strobing, aggressive crimson. Code black, Victor shouted, his composure entirely gone. He scrambled backward away from Davies, knocking over a tray of surgical instruments that clattered loudly against the floor. "Do not approach the subject, Charlotte. Initiate the plasma purge in the sequencer." "I can't," Charlotte cried, frantically pressing her palms against the locked console. "The system has overridden manual control. It's classified his biology as an active Omega-level outbreak. It's preparing to incinerate the wing to prevent ship-wide contamination." Davies swung his legs off the bed, ignoring the sharp pain in his thigh. The laceration had started bleeding again, a few drops of dark red blood hitting the pristine white floor. Victor saw the blood drop and actually screamed. "Stay back. Do not let your fluids touch the deck." "Are you out of your minds?" Davies yelled, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "It's just blood. I'm not infectious. I don't have space rabies." The heavy sealed doors at the far end of the bay hissed. The override had been triggered from the outside. Through the doorway stepped three heavily armored figures. They wore bulky matte black hazard suits, complete with opaque visors and heavy energy-based rifles raised and pointed squarely at Davies's chest. Behind them, safely behind a secondary transparent bulkhead, stood the ship's security chief. The translator supplied his name, Captain Reynolds. "Victor, what in the name of the founders is going on in here?" Reynolds's voice boomed through the intercom. "The ship's AI just flagged your medical bay as ground zero for a Class 9 bioweapon deployment. The bridge is in complete panic." "It's him," Captain Victor yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Davies. "The alien, his genetic code. It is a nightmare. His body is a walking armory of dormant hyperviruses, and his immune cells, they are highly aggressive microscopic predators. If he sheds skin cells into the ventilation system, he could introduce foreign bacterial agents that our immune systems have no defense against." Reynolds stared at the holographic data, which was still violently scrolling in red. He wasn't a scientist, but he understood the language of threat. He saw the aggressive rapid-fire division of Davies's cells, the brutal efficiency of his immune system reacting to the minor injury on his leg. To the aliens whose bodies were delicate optimized gardens, Davies's body was a brutal churning industrial factory fueled by violence and adaptation. "Stand down, human," Reynolds ordered, his voice echoing with synthetic amplification. "Do not make any sudden movements." "I'm sitting on a bed in my underwear," Davies yelled back, exasperation finally overpowering his fear. "I was in an explosion at the Aegis facility. I haven't even had a cold in 3 years. You guys are overreacting to my immune system." "He speaks," Reynolds asked, surprised. "We implanted a translator," Victor explained quickly. "Captain, you don't understand. His species, their DNA operates on a principle of hyper-adaptation through continuous microscopic warfare. To survive their homeworld, they had to evolve an internal environment more hostile than the external one. If even a fraction of the dormant retroviruses in his genome become active in our atmosphere—" "Say no more," Reynolds cut him off. "Guards, initiate containment protocols. Subdue the target." The three armored figures advanced slowly. The tips of their rifles glowed with a dangerous blue energy. Davies's pulse spiked. His adrenal glands, a primitive evolutionary trait completely unknown to the serene aliens, flooded his system with a massive dose of epinephrine. His heart rate doubled. His pupils dilated. The pain in his leg vanished, replaced by the hot electric hum of the fight-or-flight response. To the medical scanners still monitoring him, this sudden spike in chemical hormones was interpreted as an escalation. "Warning," the automated system shrieked. Subject's internal chemistry is altering rapidly. Aggression hormones detected. Combat stimulants synthesizing naturally. He's manufacturing combat drugs inside his own body, Victor shrieked, backing against the wall. Captain, shoot him. Use the stunners. I'm not doing anything, Davies yelled, but his voice was deeper now, tightened by adrenaline. He stood up fully, his muscles tense. He was terrified, but human terror is an aggressive emotion. The closest guard fired. A pulse of blue energy struck Davies squarely in the chest. On a normal coalition citizen, the stunner would have instantly overloaded their delicate nervous system, dropping them into a deep, dreamless coma for hours. Davies stumbled backward, gasping. It felt like he had been kicked in the chest by a mule, and a sharp, tingling static washed over his skin. It hurt like hell. But his central nervous system, built to withstand physical trauma, electrical shocks, and intense pain, simply absorbed the blow, grounded the energy, and rerouted the signals. Davies gasped, caught his balance, and looked down at his chest, then back up at the guard. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wide. He didn't fall. A heavy, terrifying silence fell over the medical bay, broken only by the wail of the alarms. He absorbed a full-yield neural shock, the guard whispered, his voice trembling over the comms. Impossible, Reynolds breathed from behind the glass. Davies rubbed his chest, the adrenaline now fully masking any pain, replaced by a surge of pure, unfiltered human defiance. Okay, he growled, glaring at the armored guards. Now I'm getting pissed off. Victor looked at Captain Reynolds, pure terror in his eyes. Evacuate the wing, Captain. Evacuate the wing now. The silence in the medical bay was heavier than the artificial gravity. The blue residual energy of the neural stunner arced across Davies's bare chest, earthing itself harmlessly into the conductive floor plating. To the armored alien guards, it was a physical impossibility. That weapon, manufactured by the premier defense contractors of the coalition core worlds, delivered a localized electromagnetic pulse designed to instantly sever the connection between a central nervous system and the motor cortex. It was designed to drop a 3-ton Jovian grazer in its tracks. Davies just stood there, breathing heavily, a faint sheen of perspiration reflecting the harsh, strobing crimson emergency lights. In truth, the science behind his survival was brutal and uniquely terrestrial. The human nervous system is wrapped in myelin sheaths, thick insulating layers of fat and protein. Combined with the high electrical resistance of human skin and the sudden layer of salt-rich sweat produced by his adrenal response, Davies's body had effectively acted as a crude biological Faraday cage. The shock had hurt a sharp, violent sting, like touching a live wire on a heavy-duty Tesla Powerwall back on Earth, but it hadn't penetrated deep enough to override his brainstem. He absorbed it. The lead guard repeated his synthesized voice, cracking with unprecedented panic. He took a step back, the heavy magnetic boots of his hazard suit clanking against the pristine deck. Captain, the kinetic dampeners did not register a drop in his bioelectric field. If anything, it amplified. Behind the reinforced observation glass, Captain Reynolds gripped the edge of his console. His pale, translucent skin seemed to turn a shade of sickly gray. Fire again. Maximum yield. Do not let him reach the containment threshold. Wait, hold on a second. Davies shouted, his voice a deep, resonant boom that made Dr. Victor visibly flinch. He took a step forward, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. The movement was too fast. The sudden kinetic acceleration of a human body evolved under the crushing weight of Earth's 1G gravity, and dense atmosphere appeared almost predatory in the ship's sterile 0.6G environment. To the guards, Davies didn't step. He lunged. All 3 guards opened fire simultaneously. 3 blinding bolts of azure energy struck Davies. One hit his shoulder, another his abdomen, and the third grazed his cheek. The sheer kinetic force of the triple blast pushed him backward, knocking his legs out from under him. He crashed hard into the solid light diagnostic table, shattering the crystalline array above it. Sparks rained down like aggressive fireflies. Target neutralized the lead guard, panted, keeping his rifle trained on the crumpled human form. "Do not drop your guard," Dr. Victor screamed from the far corner, his eyes locked on his damaged medical console. The holographic display was still violently flashing its Omega-level warning. "His cardiovascular system hasn't stopped. By the founders, it's accelerating." On the floor, Davies groaned. His muscles seized violently, locked in a temporary tetanic spasm from the massive voltage. His vision swam with black spots, and the smell of ozone and singed hair filled his nostrils. The pain was absolute agony, a searing fire burning through every nerve ending. But then the ancient reptilian part of his brain took over. It was the same biological failsafe that allowed a mother to lift a 2-ton vehicle off her child, the same evolutionary override that allowed ancient hunters to sprint for miles on shattered ankles. The human endocrine system dumped a massive toxic cocktail of cortisol endorphins and pure epinephrine directly into his bloodstream. The pain was instantly muted, shoved into the background by a chemical wall of pure, unadulterated survival instinct. Davies's fingers twitched. Then his hand gripped the edge of the shattered diagnostic table. Behind the glass, Captain Reynolds stopped breathing. The metal of the table groaned as Davies pulled himself up. The muscles in his back and arms coiled thick and dense, completely disproportionate to the sleek, elegant physiology of the coalition species. His eyes, previously wide with confusion, were now dark dilated and entirely focused. He wasn't a stranded freighter pilot anymore. He was a cornered apex predator. "Okay," Davies growled, spitting a drop of blood onto the pristine floor from where he had bitten his lip. "You want to play rough. He is standing." "How is he standing?" the guard shrieked, breaking discipline and taking 3 rapid steps backward. Davies didn't wait for them to charge their weapons again. He grabbed the heavy metallic base of the destroyed medical scanner, a piece of equipment that under standard coalition gravity would require a hover lift to move. To Davies, fueled by adrenaline and operating in low gravity, it weighed about as much as a heavy bag of concrete. With a guttural shout, he hurled the heavy scanner across the room. It sailed through the air with terrifying velocity, a massive projectile of jagged metal and sparking wires. It smashed squarely into the lead guard. The alien's lightweight kinetic armor, designed to deflect energy weapons, completely failed against raw, primitive blunt force trauma. The guard was thrown backward like a ragdoll, crashing into the heavy containment doors and slumping to the floor unconscious. The remaining 2 guards panicked. They fired wildly, but their hands were shaking. The bolts scorched the walls and shattered the remaining medical equipment, completely missing Davies. Davies closed the distance in 2 massive strides. He grabbed the barrel of the closest guard's rifle, ripping it from the alien's delicate grip with a violent twist. He didn't use the weapon. He simply tossed it aside like a toy. He grabbed the guard by the thick collar of his hazard suit and threw him into his partner. They both went down in a tangle of limbs and composite armor. The medical bay fell silent, save for the blaring alarms and Davies's heavy rhythmic breathing. He stood amidst the wreckage, a terrifying monument of fleshbone and kinetic violence. He turned his gaze slowly to the observation glass. Captain Reynolds and Dr. Victor froze, paralyzed by the sheer primal intensity radiating from the human. Now Davies set his chest heaving. He pointed a finger directly at Reynolds. "You are going to open these doors, give me back my clothes, and tell me what the hell is going on." Before Reynolds could respond, the ship's central AI, a cold, disembodied voice that echoed from hidden speakers, intervened. "Warning. Containment breach imminent. Biological hazard has breached primary defense tier. Initiating automated quarantine purge of Medical Wing 7. A purge." Davies snapped his head around. What does that mean? It means it's going to vent the atmosphere in this room into the vacuum of space. Victor sobbed, curling into a ball in the corner. "It thinks you are a plague. It is going to kill us all to save the ship." Davies's eyes widened. He heard the deep mechanical thud of the ship's primary bulkheads shifting. The air circulation systems abruptly stopped, and a high-pitched hissing sound began near the ceiling. The air pressure was already dropping. Davies didn't hesitate. He rushed toward the heavy magnetic containment doors that the guards had entered through. He jammed his fingers into the microscopic seam between the two massive slabs of metal. "You cannot open that," Reynolds shouted through the intercom, his voice a mix of awe and terror. "Those are magnetically sealed bulkheads. They are rated to withstand a micrometeorite impact." "I don't care what they're rated for," Davies roared. He planted his bare feet against the floor plating, finding purchase. He engaged every muscle in his back legs and arms, letting out a primal scream of exertion. The magnetic locks, engineered by the finest minds in the coalition, hummed with resistance. They were built to hold back explosive decompression, to resist the cold vacuum of space. But they were not designed to counter the localized, hyperdense mechanical leverage of a human being fighting for his life. With a sickening crack, the magnetic seals snapped. The heavy doors groaned, shrieking as they were forced apart against their gears. Davies pushed his face, turning a deep crimson, the veins in his neck bulging like steel cables. He forced a gap wide enough, wedged his shoulder in, and violently heaved. The door gave way, completely sliding back into its recess with a crash that shook the deck. Davies stumbled out into the pristine, brightly lit corridor of the horizon, gasping for the heavily oxygenated air. He looked back just in time to see the emergency bulkhead slam down over the observation window, sealing Victor and Reynolds safely inside their respective control rooms before the medical bay was fully vented. He was out. But as the flashing red lights of the corridor painted his skin in shades of blood and shadow, Davies realized he wasn't safe. He was alone, half naked, on an alien ship that believed his very existence was an extinction-level threat. Davies ran. He didn't know the layout of the vessel, but he understood the universal language of architecture: follow the widening corridors to reach the main arteries. Find the transit hubs, look for the command center. The interior of the horizon was a masterpiece of sleek, minimalist design. It was all flowing curves, luminescent, pearlescent panels, and seamless transitions. There were no harsh angles, no exposed wires, no heavy industrial riveting. It looked less like a spaceship and more like an art installation. To the aliens, it was an environment of peace and logic. To Davies, accustomed to the raw, utilitarian steel and titanium aesthetic of Aegis orbital rigs and the rugged pragmatism of Lockheed Martin, deep space haulers, the alien ship felt terrifyingly fragile. As he sprinted down the corridor, his bare feet slapped loudly against the smart glass flooring. He realized quickly that he had to regulate his stride. In the 0.6 G environment, Every heavy push of his legs threatened to launch him into the ceiling. He felt like a cannonball bouncing through a porcelain shop. Intruder detected in Sector 4, the ship's AI droned overhead. Deploying automated pacification units. From hidden alcoves in the walls, 3 drones glided into the corridor. They were beautiful machines resembling silver manta rays floating on anti-gravity repulsors. They hummed with a quiet, elegant efficiency. As they spotted Davies, they deployed an array of glowing blue tethers, stasis nets, designed to softly entangle and immobilize a target. Davies didn't slow down. Back on Earth, he had seen footage of heavy-duty riot pacification droids built by Boston Dynamics, massive terrifying blocks of armor and hydraulics. These flying silver discs looked like luxury toys by comparison. As the first drone fired its stasis net, Davies ducked, letting the glowing energy web sail over his head. Without missing a beat, he lunged forward, grabbed the drone by its sleek aerodynamic wing, and used his momentum to swing it like a discus. He smashed the first drone directly into the second. Both machines shattered into a shower of sparks and elegant lightweight components spiraling into the walls. The third drone immediately retreated its programming, unable to compute the sheer kinetic brutality it had just witnessed. In the ship's primary security center, Lieutenant Brooks stared at the holographic monitors in absolute disbelief. "Captain Reynolds, I need you to see this," Brooks stammered over the internal comms. "The subject is moving through the ship. He has completely bypassed Sector 4. "Did the pacification drone slow him down?" Reynolds' voice crackled back tight with anxiety. He was still locked in his observation booth. He used one drone as a kinetic weapon to destroy the other," Brooks said, swallowing hard. "Captain, the structural integrity of the decks is compromised wherever he runs. His footfalls are generating micro-fractures in the smart glass. And that's not the worst part." "Explain," Reynolds demanded. Brooks tapped a console, bringing up a complex array of biological sensors. "The ship's atmospheric scrubbers are failing in his wake. The AI is reporting a massive surge of airborne contaminants. It's his dermal layer, Captain. He is actively shedding thousands of dead microscopic biological plates with every step, and he is exhaling a highly corrosive compound." Corrosive. Carbon dioxide laced with microscopic moisture droplets. Brooks read the data, his eyes wide. "Our internal atmosphere is designed for a sterile, pure oxygen-nitrogen mix. His breath is creating a localized greenhouse effect. The humidity from his sweat is literally shorting out the surface-level tactile sensors on the walls. He isn't just a threat, Captain. He is a walking terraforming engine. He is physically altering the environment of the ship just by existing in it." Davies, meanwhile, had reached a large open intersection. 4 massive corridors met at a central hub dominated by a towering luminescent pillar of water that seemed to serve as both decoration and environmental regulation. He paused, leaning against a sleek, pearlescent bulkhead to catch his breath. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly, the adrenaline crash beginning to hover at the edges of his consciousness. He needed water. He needed a weapon. Most importantly, he needed a way to communicate without being shot at. He noticed a console embedded in the wall next to him. It was a smooth, glassy surface with slowly shifting geometric shapes. Assuming it was a communication terminal, Davies pressed his hand against it. The console instantly shorted out. A spiderweb of cracks spread from beneath his palm, and the screen flashed red before dying completely. "Damn it," Davies muttered. The sheer thermal output of his body, combined with the galvanic moisture of his sweat, had overloaded the delicate capacitive touch sensors designed for dry, cold alien digits. Suddenly, a group of 5 crew members rounded the corner. They wore the standard silver uniforms, entirely unarmored. They were carrying data pads, likely engineers or technicians responding to the alarms. They stopped dead in their tracks. They stared at Davies, a towering, sweaty, bruised, half-naked primate, his chest heaving, his muscles still tense, with residual adrenaline standing over a broken smoking control panel. To Davies, they looked terrified and helpless. He raised a hand slowly. "Look, guys, I don't want to hurt anyone. I just need to speak to whoever is in charge." He didn't even get to finish his sentence. The technician closest to the front dropped his data pad. His eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed onto the floor in a dead faint. The sheer biological terror radiating from Davies, the aggressive pheromones, the predatory forward-facing eyes, the massive physical bulk had triggered a shock-induced vasovagal response in the fragile alien's nervous system. The other 4 didn't hesitate. They turned and fled in absolute panic, their elegant fluid movements breaking into a chaotic scramble. "Oh, come on!" Davies yelled after them, his voice echoing loudly down the hall. "I just want my pants!" Warning the ship's AI chimed again, its voice now echoing through the entire hub. Omega-level threat has breached the central promenade. Biological contamination is spreading. Organic rot detected in Sector 4 ventilation shafts. Initiating ship-wide lockdown. Preparing to jettison infected sectors. Davies froze. Organic rot jettison infected sectors. The AI wasn't talking about him breaking things. It was talking about a biological infection. But Davies knew he wasn't sick. He had passed a rigorous multi-tiered medical physical administered by Pfizer's aerospace division just 3 weeks ago before taking the Aegis contract. He was perfectly healthy. Unless the rot wasn't a disease he carried. What if the contamination was just the natural human microbiome? Humans are ecosystems. Trillions of bacteria, fungi, and microflora live on the skin, in the gut, and in the mouth. It is a symbiotic armor that protects humanity from the harsh environment of Earth. But to a sterile alien ship that had never encountered terrestrial biology, common skin flora like Staphylococcus epidermidis, or the microscopic yeast spores naturally present in human breath, might register as an aggressive flesh-eating plague. If the ship jettisoned the sectors he had walked through, it would tear itself apart. He had to stop the AI. He had to get to the bridge. Davies looked at the towering water pillar in the center of the room. A series of thick, translucent pipes ran from its base up toward the ceiling, disappearing into a massive access hatch. It looked like primary coolant lines leading to the upper decks, leading to command. With a deep breath, Davies jumped. In the low gravity, he sailed effortlessly across the room, catching the thickest of the pipes. He began to climb, pulling himself up hand over hand, ascending into the mechanical guts of the horizon. The crawl space above the central hub was cramped dark and suffocatingly warm. Here, stripped of the elegant pearlescent paneling, the true machinery of the alien ship was exposed. It was a labyrinth of glowing conduits, crystalline memory banks, and soft, almost organic-looking ventilation tubes. As Davies crawled his broad shoulders, scraping against the delicate conduits, he noticed something strange. The pristine glowing machinery wasn't entirely clean. Clinging to the junctions of the ventilation tubes, hiding in the warm shadows of the power couplings, was a thick gray web-like substance. It looked like a cross between a spider's web and a patch of dry mold. Where it touched the machinery, the glowing blue energy of the ship seemed dim and sickly. Davies paused, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. He reached out and touched the gray web. It felt dry and brittle like dead leaves. As his sweat-slicked finger made contact, the gray web instantly recoiled, violently dissolving into dust where his skin had touched it. Warning: anomaly detected in primary ventilation trunk. The AI announced its voice, now sounding strangely distorted, as if struggling through static. Omega-level contaminant is engaging. Unknown biological agent. Standby. Re-evaluating threat assessment. On the bridge, the situation had descended into absolute chaos. Captain Reynolds, having finally bypassed the lockdown of his observation booth, burst onto the command deck. The bridge was a massive panoramic dome of transparent aluminum, offering a breathtaking view of the cosmos. But the crew wasn't looking at the stars. They were collapsed over their consoles, gasping for air. Lieutenant Brooks was on the floor, clutching his throat, his translucent skin turning a terrifying shade of violet. "Report," Reynolds demanded, rushing to Brooks' side. "What is the human doing? Did he breach the command deck?" It's not the human," Brooks choked out, his lungs rattling. "The AI, it found something else. In the scrubbers. A silice organic spore. We must have picked it up when we scanned that derelict freighter in the outer rim. It's been breeding in the ventilation system. The human's presence triggered its defensive sporulation." Reynolds stared at the primary tactical display. It was a chaotic mess of red and blue data streams. The ship had been infected for weeks. A stealthy parasitic mold from a dead world had been slowly devouring the ship's bioorganic filtration systems. Because the alien crew's immune systems were so weak and their internal sensors so focused on external threats, the ship hadn't even noticed it was dying from the inside out. Until Davies Miller was brought aboard. When the humans started running through the ship, sweating, breathing heavily, and shedding his terrestrial microbiome, the alien parasite reacted. It sensed a massive, terrifying biological predator entering its territory, and it panicked. It had mass-released its spores into the air scrubbers to defend itself, inadvertently poisoning the fragile alien crew in the process. "The human's biology," Reynolds whispered, watching the data scroll. "The AI is classifying his microflora. Captain the human's junk DNA, the bacteria on his skin. It is highly acidic to the parasite. His sweat contains lactic acid and antimicrobial peptides that are instantly dissolving the spore's cellular walls." "He is the Omega threat," Brooks rasped, his vision fading. "But he is a threat to the parasite, to the infection. He is an antibody." Before Reynolds could process the sheer absurdity of the situation, that the terrifying, indestructible primate tearing through their ship was actually acting as a walking immune system. The heavy reinforced ceiling panels of the bridge suddenly groaned. A loud metallic screech echoed through the dome. The alien crew members who were still conscious looked up in horror. With a deafening crash, a ventilation grate, the size of a dining table, was violently kicked out of its housing. It clattered against the pristine glass floor of the bridge. A moment later, Davies dropped from the ceiling. He landed heavily, the impact cracking the deck plating beneath his bare feet. He was covered in dust sweat and streaks of gray ash from the dissolving parasite webs. He looked wild, furious, and utterly out of place in the sleek, dying command center. The remaining security officers on the bridge raised their weapons, their hands trembling violently as they struggled to breathe through the spore-choked air. Davies stood up to his full height, glaring at them. He didn't raise his hands this time. He was done playing the victim. "Put the guns down," Davies commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated in the chests of the aliens. "Or I will start breaking things you actually need." Reynolds, holding up a weak hand, coughed violently. Stand down. Lower your weapons." Davies narrowed his eyes, stepping toward the captain. "You're the guy from the glass box." Reynolds, right. "You want to tell me why your ship is trying to vent me into space while your own crew is choking to death on space mold." Reynolds looked up at the towering human. He saw the sweat dripping from Davies's chin, the heavy muscular rise and fall of his chest. He saw a creature forged in the biological crucible of Earth, an organism so violently adapted to survival that it carried its own microscopic arsenal wherever it went. "The ship," Reynolds wheezed, his strength failing him. "The parasite. We cannot fight it. Our immune systems, our filters, they are failing." Davies looked around. He saw the gray web-like substance beginning to creep out of the ventilation shafts onto the bridge, choking the air. He saw the elegant, fragile aliens dying around him. He remembered the crawl space. He remembered how the webs had dissolved simply from touching his skin. "Your AI is an idiot," Davies said bluntly. He walked over to the nearest console, ignoring the terrified flinch of the technician beside it. He grabbed a heavy metal tool, some kind of diagnostic wrench, from the tray. "What are you doing?" Reynolds gasped. "You guys engineered the fight out of yourselves," Davies said, his voice softening just a fraction. He looked at the heavy wrench in his hand, then at the thick cluster of ventilation intake valves on the far wall, currently spewing the toxic gray spores into the room. "Where I'm from, we fight everything, even the dirt." Davies walked over to the intake valves. He didn't look for a control panel or a digital override. He raised the heavy metal wrench and violently smashed it into the sleek pearlescent casing of the environmental controls. The delicate machinery shattered, exposing the primary air mix turbines. Warning: manual override of environmental systems detected. The AI droned. "Hey, computer," Davies yelled at the ceiling. "You want my contamination? You want my junk DNA? Come and get it." Davies leaned directly into the exposed sucking intake of the primary ventilation turbine. He took a massive, deep breath of the spore-filled air. The alien crew watched in absolute horror, expecting the human to instantly suffocate and die. Instead, Davies exhaled. He blew a massive breath of hot, heavily oxygenated carbon dioxide-rich air directly into the ship's primary circulatory system. He coughed deliberately, clearing his lungs, sending thousands of droplets of terrestrial moisture, lactic acid, and human respiratory bacteria straight into the heart of the alien vessel. He wasn't attacking the ship. He was inoculating it. Re-evaluating internal atmosphere, the AI announced, its voice suddenly clear, the static fading. "Foreign silicon spore agent encountering massive biological resistance. Spore cellular degradation at 40%, 70%, 90%. Contaminant neutralized in sector command." The gray webs creeping across the bridge suddenly stopped. Then, as the freshly circulated human-tainted air hit them, they withered, turning brittle and dissolving into harmless gray dust. The suffocating pressure in the room immediately lifted. Lieutenant Brooks took a deep, shuddering gasp of air, his skin slowly returning to its normal pale hue. Davies turned back to Reynolds, dropping the wrench onto the deck with a loud clatter. He crossed his arms over his bare chest, a massive, imposing figure of earthborn resilience, standing victorious in the heart of an advanced alien warship. "Now," Davies said, a tired, but triumphant smirk crossing his face. "Are you going to get me my pants, or do I have to go find the laundry room myself?" The silence on the bridge was deafening, broken only by the steady rhythmic hum of the newly cleared ventilation turbines. The gray, silicy organic webs that had choked the consoles and bulkheads were now nothing more than a fine, inert powder easily swept away by the ship's automated micro-vacuums. Captain Reynolds slowly pushed himself up from the floor, leaning heavily against his command chair. He looked at the readouts on his main screen. The air quality in the bridge and the immediate surrounding corridors had spiked to a 99.8% purity rating, a level of biological safety the ship hadn't registered since it left dry dock. He turned his gaze to Davies. The human was leaning against a pristine bulkhead, arms crossed, looking remarkably annoyed for a creature that had just cured a microscopic alien plague by breathing heavily. "You," Reynolds started, his voice still raspy. "Your exhalations, they neutralize the spores." "Yeah, well, back on Earth we call it getting some fresh air," Davies said dryly. "And my leg is still bleeding, Captain. I'd love to get that patched up, preferably without your medical scanner trying to nuke the room." Before Reynolds could answer, the heavy blast doors to the bridge hissed open. Dr. Victor stumbled in, flanked by Nurse Charlotte. Both were wearing bulky, fully sealed hazard suits, their visors tinted dark to shield them from the presumed horrors of the human biological payload. Captain Victor cried, his synthesized voice muffled by the suit's heavy helmet. "We detected a massive biological spike on the bridge. Are you infected? We brought the heavy neutralizing foam." Victor stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the clean bridge, then at the healthy, albeit exhausted crew, and finally at Davies, who was standing there in his underwear, completely unbothered. "Doctor, put the foam away," Reynolds commanded, standing up straighter. "We are not infected. We are cured. The human's natural microbiome is entirely antagonistic to the silicon spore parasite." "That is biologically impossible," Victor stammered, stepping forward to look at the bridge's atmospheric scanners. His pale blue eyes widened behind his visor. The lactic acid in his sweat, the complex carbon chains in his breath, they are acting like a targeted, highly corrosive solvent on the parasite's cellular walls. The human is a walking, breathing bioweapon. "I prefer the term walking hand sanitizer," Davies muttered. "But the rest of the ship," Charlotte interjected softly, pointing to a holographic schematic of the horizon. The central command decks were glowing a healthy blue, but the outer rings, the engine rooms, the cargo bays, the crew quarters, were flashing a dire, toxic yellow. "The parasite has entrenched itself in the lower decks. The environmental scrubbers down there are failing. We have perhaps 2 hours before the structural integrity of the hull is compromised by the rot." Reynolds looked at Davies. A profound shift had occurred in the captain's eyes. The primal terror had faded, replaced by a deep, almost reverent awe. In the vast, sterile expanse of the coalition, humanity was a chaotic anomaly. But right now, chaos was exactly what they needed. "Davies," Reynolds said, testing the human name on his tongue. "You have saved the bridge crew, but my ship is dying. Our engineering teams cannot survive in the lower decks to repair the scrubbers. The air is too toxic for us." "Let me guess," Davies sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You need me to go down there and breathe on things." "Essentially, yes," Victor said, his scientific curiosity finally overriding his fear. He tapped his datapad. "If we can get you into the primary environmental mixing chamber, the heart of the ship's atmospheric circulatory system, you could theoretically inoculate the entire vessel. We would need you to..." Shed your microbiome directly into the main airflow. Davies raised an eyebrow. You want me to climb into your ship's main HVAC system and sweat? We would require a massive expulsion of your biological material, Victor confirmed entirely deadpan. Heat generation, kinetic exertion, maximum respiratory output. Davies thought about it. He remembered the grueling survival training he had undergone during his contract certifications with SpaceX Deep Space Division and the heavy-duty environmental suits manufactured by Honeywell he had to wear for 12 hours straight. He knew how to sweat. All right, Davies said, his tone turning completely businesslike. But we are doing this my way. First, Charlotte fixes my leg. A bandage, some medical tape, no lasers, no fancy sequencers. Second, you get me some water. Third, the second this ship is clean, you set a course for the nearest coalition outpost and get me a communication line to Aegis Aerospace. I have a daughter's tuition to pay, and I am not missing my payload bonus because my freighter blew up. Reynolds didn't hesitate. He nodded sharply. Agreed. You have the full cooperation of the coalition. Dr. Victor, prepare the human. The primary environmental mixing chamber of the Horizon was located deep in the bowels of the ship. It was a massive cavernous room filled with towering luminescent fluid tanks and spinning crystalline turbines. It looked like the delicate glowing heart of a glass giant. Davies stood on a platform directly above the main intake fan, a massive spinning vortex that sucked air from the chamber and distributed it at high velocity to every single room, corridor, and crawl space on the ship. He was feeling much better. Charlotte had nervously but efficiently cleaned and sealed the laceration on his thigh, using a dermal bonding agent that felt like high-tech superglue. He had downed 3 liters of synthesized water, which tasted vaguely of static electricity, but did the job. He was standing inside a localized containment sphere, a transparent bubble placed directly over the intake fan. "Can you hear me, Davies?" Reynolds's voice echoed through the internal comms of the chamber. Loud and clear, Captain Davies said, stretching his arms, feeling the satisfying pop of his joints. "Turn off the climate control in this bubble. I need it hot. Bring it up to about 40 degrees Celsius, or roughly 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and dial back the gravity to full Earth standard 1G. In the control room, Victor hesitated. Captain, 40 degrees Celsius is approaching the protein denaturation threshold for most coalition species. It is a lethal temperature. I am not a coalition species, Doc. Davies's voice crackled back with a hint of amusement. I'm from Texas. Just turn up the heat. Reynolds nodded to the technicians. Do as he says. Inside the bubble, the air grew instantly thick and heavy. The ambient glow of the room seemed to warp as the heat radiated from the floor plates. Davies felt the familiar oppressive weight of Earth's gravity settle onto his shoulders. It felt like home. All right, Davies muttered to himself. Time to go to work. He started with jumping jacks. He moved with a practiced rhythmic intensity. The sheer kinetic force of his heavy 1G movements echoed through the alien machinery like the beating of a war drum. On the holographic monitors in the control room, Victor and Reynolds watched the biological data stream in real time. His core temperature is rising. Victor reported, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and fascination. 37 degrees, 38. By the founders, he is voluntarily inducing a hyperthermic state. Davies dropped to the floor and began hammering out push-ups. He didn't pace himself. He pushed his body hard, engaging his chest, his shoulders, his core. The sweat beaded on his forehead, rolling down his face, dripping from his nose onto the pristine alien grill of the intake fan. "We have microbiome dispersal," Victor announced, his fingers flying across the console. "The intake fan is pulling his shed dermal cells' airborne moisture and lactic acid directly into the primary ventilation trunk." Davies switched from push-ups to burpees. He launched himself into the air landing heavily, dropping into a squat, kicking his legs back, doing a push-up, and springing back up. He moved with the relentless mechanical efficiency of a biological engine. His breath was ragged, heavy, and hot. He was exhaling massive volumes of carbon dioxide and complex terrestrial proteins. Through the ship's internal sensors, the alien crew watched a microscopic war unfold. The ship's AI projected the data onto the main screen. The human biological payload, a chaotic, aggressive soup of Staphylococcus moisture and naturally acidic sweat, hit the silicon spore parasite like a tidal wave of battery acid. In Sector 6, a massive cluster of the gray webbing was clinging to a power relay. The moment the humid, human-scented air blew out of the vents, the webbing shrieked silently. The alien mold evolved to slowly consume delicate, dry organic matter, was suddenly introduced to Earth's apex micro-predators. The human bacteria swarmed the mold, digesting it with brutal 3-billion-year-old efficiency. The lactic acid dissolved the spore walls. The webbing turned black, curled in on itself, and shattered into dust. "Sector 6 is clear," Brooks reported over the comms, his voice tinged with disbelief. Inside the bubble, Davies was completely soaked. His skin was flushed red, his muscles engorged with blood. He was running in place now, driving his knees high, his heavy breathing sounding like a localized hurricane over the open comms channel. To him, this was a Tuesday morning workout routine, mandated by his SpaceX physical fitness clauses. To the aliens, it was a display of incomprehensible, self-destructive stamina. "His cardiovascular system is operating at 200% of our theoretical maximums," Victor whispered, mesmerized by the readouts. The sheer strain on his heart, the toxic buildup in his muscles. His body is actively destroying itself to generate this heat. "No," Reynolds corrected quietly, watching the human push through the pain. "His body is built to survive this. It requires this friction to thrive. They are a species forged in an anvil." "Sector 8 is clear," the AI announced cleanly. "Sector 9 engineering bay is clear. Parasitic presence reduced to 12%. Davies dropped into a plank position, his core trembling slightly from the exhaustion. Sweat poured off his face in a continuous stream directly into the intake fans. The chamber smelled heavily of ozone heat and raw, unfiltered humanity. "Computer," Davies grunted between heavy breaths. "How are we looking?" "Parasitic presence at 4%, 2%, 0%. The AI chimed, its voice entirely free of the previous static. "Vessel is 100% clear of Class 9 silice organic contamination. Atmospheric scrubbers are nominal. Environmental stability restored." Davies collapsed onto his back on the heavy grill, his chest heaving, a massive grin spreading across his face. "Houston, we have a solution." In the control room, Captain Reynolds let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for an eternity. He looked at Dr. Victor. "Doctor," Reynolds said firmly, "access the Coalition database. I want the human species reclassified immediately." Victor nodded, his fingers hovering over his datapad. "Removing Omega-level threat designation. What should I input, Captain?" Reynolds looked back at the monitors, watching the human slowly sit up, wiping sweat from his eyes. Class 1 Biological Custodian, Reynolds said, and flagged their homeworld as a critical protected asset. The universe is a sterile, fragile place, Victor. We just found our immune system. 4 days later, the horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel, gliding smoothly into the bustling orbital traffic of the core world station Ethelgard. It was a massive gleaming metropolis floating in the void, a hub of coalition commerce, diplomacy, and science. Davies Miller stood by the panoramic window of the VIP observation deck, wearing a tailored, surprisingly comfortable outfit that the ship's fabricators had synthesized for him based on his descriptions of Earth clothing. It was a sleek, dark blue jacket and durable pants interwoven with microthermal regulators. He held a datapad in his hand. It wasn't displaying biological horrors. It was displaying his bank account. True to his word, Captain Reynolds had secured a high-priority comms line to Aegis Aerospace. But the real shock came when the Coalition Command officially processed Davies's consulting fee for saving a multi-billion credit flagship from a biological disaster. The sum transferred into his account was enough to pay his daughter's tuition, buy her a house, and probably purchase a small private island back on Earth. The door to the observation deck hissed open. Captain Reynolds entered, followed closely by Dr. Victor. Neither of them wore hazard suits anymore, though Victor still kept a respectful, slightly nervous distance. "Mr. Miller," Reynolds said, offering a stiff, highly formal coalition bow. "The station master has cleared your shuttle. Your transport back to the Sol system is ready. A Lockheed diplomatic cruiser was actually in the sector. They are eager to bring you home." "Thanks, Captain," Davies said, turning away from the window. "I appreciate the ride and the new threads." Victor cleared his throat, holding a small silver stasis case. "Davies, before you go, Coalition High Command has authorized a unique request, if you are willing." Davies eyed the case. "I already sweat out half my body weight into your vents, Doc. What else do you want?" "Not sweat," Victor said, opening the case to reveal a series of sterile, high-density storage vials. "We want your blood, your saliva, your tears. With your permission, the Coalition Medical Science Directorate wishes to study the terrestrial microbiome. We have spent 10 millennia trying to engineer disease out of existence, and in doing so, we have made ourselves completely defenseless against the natural universe. We want to learn how your species uses chaos as a shield." Davies looked at the vials, then up at the alien doctor. The irony was palpable. The very biology that had triggered the ship's extinction alarms just days ago was now the most sought-after commodity in the galaxy. Earth wasn't a death world to be feared. It was a biological fortress, an arsenal of resilience. "Sure, Doc," Davies smiled, rolling up the sleeve of his new jacket. "Take whatever samples you need, but I'm going to have to charge you the Pfizer premium rate for biomedical data." Victor looked confused by the joke, but nodded earnestly. "Of course, your compensation will be limitless." An hour later, Davies walked down the boarding ramp toward the waiting Earth cruiser. As he stepped through the airlock, the human crew of the cruiser, decked out in crisp utilitarian Navy uniforms, looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The word of his exploits had already reached the human diplomatic corps. He wasn't just a freighter pilot anymore. He was the man who had terrified a coalition warship by simply existing. Reynolds stood at the edge of the airlock watching him go. "Captain," Davies called out, pausing before the doors sealed. "If you guys ever get mold in your vents again, you know who to call." "We will, Davies Miller," Reynolds replied, placing a hand over his chest in a gesture of profound respect. "Safe travels back to your magnificent, terrifying world. The airlock sealed with a heavy, satisfying thud. Davies walked down the corridor of the human ship, the familiar smell of recycled air ozone and faint machine oil greeting him like an old friend. He pulled out his personal comms device, bringing up a picture of his daughter. He had survived an explosion, the vacuum of space, and an alien bio-purge. He had taken down armored guards with a medical scanner and out-wrestled magnetic bulkheads. But as he looked at the smiling face of his kid and the massive string of zeros in his bank account, he knew exactly what his next mission was. He was going to be home in time for dinner. If you enjoyed this HFY sci-fi story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe to the channel. Ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our weekly uploads. The universe is a vast, unpredictable place, but stories like this remind us that humanity's greatest superpower isn't plasma rifles or hyperdrives. It's our unstoppable, chaotic biology. We evolved to survive the harshest conditions, and sometimes the best weapon against the unknown is just a little bit of earthborn resilience. What do you think is the craziest, most overpowered aspect of the human body? Is it our adrenaline, our immune system, or our sheer stamina? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love